Hello, everybody. I'm George from Ireland. Thanks for coming back to my channel. And this is about the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Angela Rayner, the Secretary of State for Housing, who doesn't know the rules around paying stamp duty for housing. Well, ignorantia lex non excusat, as I'm sure Miss Rayner will be unable to tell you. She is a complete ignoramus. She's definitely not on top of a brief, and we've had this before where she couldn't answer the most basic things about education, despite being education secretary. It was a calculated insult. It was anti-pedagogical, an absolute ignoramus, an educational disaster zone who was in charge. She brings shame upon the United Kingdom as well as her party. And indeed, how outrageous to try and exploit her child's disability as an excuse for not paying the proper amount of stamp duty. Okay, her little boy who was born severely disabled, that's terrible. Obviously, feel sympathy for him and indeed for his mother. But don't misuse him as a reason why you don't pay the proper amount of stamp duty. Don't bring your children into politics. That's really sick, And I've followed her on Instagram and seen the photos and saying a granular moment and she's a grandmother and so on, because that will be appealing to some voters. But you've got to take the rough with the smooth, right? Misusing this money, the compensation paid out for a child's disability, to enrich herself, to buy that property and a home which her child doesn't live in, hundreds of miles from where her little boy lives. She's got three sons, one of whom's one of whom's a father himself, so making her a grandmother since the age of about 42. All right. So Angela Rayner, she's a thief. She said to herself that she stole from shops on multiple occasions. I know I'm being a bit unfair to calling a thief. I mean, that was 30 years ago. Okay, she should be forgiven. Obviously, there's absolution. Methinks this was de minimis and all the rest of it. But she hasn't grown out of it, ripping the taxpayer off to the tune of £40,000. That's more than the average income, let alone the minimum wage is about £25,000 a year. So this is no sixpenny matter. So she's referred herself to the Commissioner for Ministerial Standards. I think proper title is actually Independent Advisor on Minister's Interests, Sir Laurie Magnus. Now, Sir Laurie, he found against Nadeem Zahawi, the Conservative cabinet minister. So Zahawi was a self-made multi-millionaire through YouGov, that polling company. So Majesty's Revenue Customs were looking into his tax affairs when he was appointed Secretary of State for Education and Lifelong Learning in September 2021. That was under Boris Johnson. I remember when Rishi Sunak led that rebellion against Johnson over supposedly the mishandling of the Chris Pincher allegations. And Nadeem Zahawi was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer in July 2022. And he's the one who really brought down Johnson, saying, you've got to resign or I'll resign. You want a third chancellor in one day? But anyway, when he was appointed his positions, are there any outstanding investigations against you? And he said no, which was a lie. And when the rumors came out in the media just after he's appointed chancellor, he said, no, there's an attempt to destroy my reputation. This is completely bogus. But it wasn't bogus. And he only fessed up in January 2023. So he'd lied to the public. I don't think he'd misled the House of Commons. Remember, one of the standards for ministers is they have to be open. They mustn't be not lying. They must be concealing the truth. Well, he don't be more than concealing the truth. He'd actually made false statements knowingly. So anyway, he'd underpaid his tax. He had to pay millions of pounds more because he's a very, very wealthy person as a bit of a penalty and so on. And hadn't made the Prime Minister aware of this. Had the Prime Minister been cognizant of this, he presumably wouldn't have appointed him, especially to be Chancellor of all positions in charge of fiscal probity. So Laurie said that Mr. Zahawi's his failure to disclose was a grave breach of the standards incumbent upon a minister, and therefore he stood down as chairman of the Conservative Party and Minister for Portfolio. Those are the offices he was holding in 2023 under Rishi Sunak. So from the same principles, it must flow that Angela Rayner has got to go. She seriously underpaid stamp duty, which is a form of tax. And what else? She's lied to the public about it. And then she tried to blame her solicitors or whatever and say that's not true. We never gave her advice on this. So she's lied on multiple occasions, just like what she did regarding her, the council house she purchased under the right to buy scheme when actually it wasn't her main home. And then she said that Hove was her main home only for the purpose of minimizing a stamp duty liability, when for every other purpose is actually her constituency house, where her children live, where all her bank statements go. And so she's contradicted herself, she's tied herself in knots. Now, if Sir Magnus found that she's breached the Ministerial Code, she's not legally required to resign, nor is Sir Keir Starmer legally obliged to sack her for failing to do so. I know theoretically it's the monarch who does so, but we know his Britannic Majesty always acts upon ministerial advice. Now, why is Starmer not guaranteeing that he would sack her if the Sir Magnus finds against her? He'd be very reluctant to do so because it would cause him real ructions. She'll go down amongst the leftards as, oh, a martyr to misogyny, a victim of snobbery, or something like that. So they will do anything to change the subject. What it actually is a case of lack of probity, of failure to act in consonance with the ethical standards incumbent upon all ministers of the crown. The Nolan principles in public life were set out about 30 years ago in the dog days of John Major, a conservative prime minister and first lord of the treasury. So Summer doesn't want to lose her because of her backstory, sob story. Oh, woe is me. I was a mother at 16. Well, Angela wanted to have sex at 16. She did. She wanted to give birth to a baby at 16. She did. She wanted to bring up a child when she's 16. She did. So she got what she wanted. Why do you have to feel sorry for her? Some people want to have children, never get to have them. Some people want some nookie and never get it. Some people want to bring up their child for whatever reason they can't. Okay. She lived in a country with very generous welfare and all the rest of it. So she's been able to exploit that first child as a reason to. I mean, who said vote for me because I didn't have a child at 16? What? Or vote for me because I gave my child up for adoption? That wouldn't work either. But anyway, the fact that she's like an uneducated person, that actually appeals to some people. I mean, a lot of the reform UK politicians are uneducated, but they don't harp on about it. Anyway, so she obviously can't read an adult level. She doesn't have the cognitive faculties to understand the things before her. I suppose in this case, stupidity might actually be a valid excuse, but that may rescue her honesty at the expense of her capacity to do the job, or capability rather. So is she going to go? Because he is the old Lyndon Baines Johnson principle. I'd rather have her inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. She would be a very problematic backbencher. She'd be the king over the waters, at work. Should I say queen? That's gendered language. She'd be trying to undermine him. Everybody knows that she wants to succeed Sir Keir Starmer. Think he'll be out sooner rather than later. Starmer is lying again, saying he'll lead Labour into the next election. He doesn't intend to do so, and he knows his days are numbered. So she's trying to set herself up, have a safe Labour constituency on the south coast and stuff like that. So she'd be a trouble for him. She could bring him down and leading these leftist rebellions. So he really doesn't want to lose her. But if he keeps her, on the other hand, that'll be a field day for the opposition, because what an outrageous breach of standards in public life. You see how grossly unethical you are. And the public will say, you're just as sleazy as the Tories. All right. Thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, PayPal, georgecullen7@gmail.com. Goodbye.